They called the obese girl the fat monster and threw stones at her. The mountain man stepped in. The sun hung like a copper coin in the merciless Arizona sky, baking Dustwater Gulch until the wooden boardwalk steamed and the air shimmered with
I
heat.
don't know if I can watch you walk
Clara
away.
Evans moved through the dusty street with her head down, arms wrapped around a cloth bundle that held her week's worth of bread. 7 precious loaves she'd bartered for by scrubbing laundry until her hands bled. At 16, she had learned that invisibility was survival, that if she made herself small enough in spirit, maybe the townspeople would forget she existed. But they never forgot. "Look out, boys! The behemoth's on the move!" Luke Harrison's voice cut through the afternoon quiet like a saw blade. "Better get out of the way before she flattens the whole street." Laughter erupted from the group of young men lounging outside the saloon. Clara's stomach clenched, but she kept walking, kept her eyes on the boarding house 3 buildings away where Widow Gable waited with her endless pile of soiled linens and her thin, cold room that Clara called home. Luke pushed off the hitching post where he'd been leaning and stepped into Clara's path. At 19, he was the son of the town's wealthiest rancher with his father's money and none of his father's sense. His companions, 3 other idle young men with too much time and too little conscience, flanked him, forming a wall of malice. "Where you going so fast, behemoth?" Luke's smile was ugly. "Got important business? Meeting with the governor? Oh, wait, I forgot. You're just the fat laundry girl nobody wants." Clara tried to step around him, but Luke moved with her, blocking her path. "Excuse me," she said quietly, hating how her voice shook. "Excuse me," Luke mimicked in a high-pitched whine. His friends laughed dutifully. "What's in the bundle? More food for you to stuff yourself with?" Before Clara could react, Luke snatched the cloth bundle from her arms. The loaves spilled onto the dusty street, and one of his companions, a weaselly youth named Pete, stomped on them deliberately, grinding them into the dirt with his boot heel. "Oops," Pete said, grinning. "Looks like the fat girl's going hungry this week." Clara's vision blurred with tears she refused to let fall. That bread represented 14 hours of scrubbing in lye water, her knuckles raw and bleeding, her back screaming from bending over the washtubs. It was her food for the entire week. Widow Gable only provided 1 meal a day, and Clara's meager wages couldn't stretch to more. "Please," she whispered, dropping to her knees to gather what she could salvage, "please just leave me alone." "Leave you alone?" Luke's voice took on a dangerous edge. "But we're just having fun, aren't we, boys?" One of them kicked dirt over the remaining bread. Another stepped on Clara's hand as she reached for a loaf, and she cried out in pain. Around them, townspeople paused to watch. Mrs. Henderson clutched her parasol and hurried past, eyes averted. The blacksmith stood in his doorway but made no move to intervene. Even Reverend Walsh, emerging from the church across the street, saw what was happening and retreated back inside. No one in Dustwater Gulch ever helped Clara Evans. She had learned this lesson in the 2 years since her parents' wagon had crashed on the mountain pass, killing them both and leaving her stranded in this cruel town with nothing but the clothes on her back and a body that invited mockery. Luke bent down and grabbed Clara's chin, forcing her to look at him. His breath smelled of whiskey and tobacco. "You know what you are. You're a monster, a fat, useless monster that nobody wants and nobody needs." He shoved her backward. Clara's substantial weight carried her down hard. and pain shot through her tailbone as she hit the packed earth. Luke's companions began to laugh, and then one of them, she couldn't see who through her tears, threw something. A rock the size of a walnut struck Clara's shoulder, and she gasped. "Good shot," Luke crowed. "Let's see who can hit the target." More rocks came, small ones at first. They struck Clara's arms, her back, her legs. She curled into a ball, trying to protect her head as the laughter grew louder and more rocks flew. One caught her above the eye, and she felt hot blood trickle down her face. "Monster! Monster! Monster!" they chanted, and Clara heard more voices joining in, children, adults, the whole street taking up the cruel chorus. Luke bent and picked up a rock the size of his fist, jagged and heavy. He hefted it, testing the weight, and Clara saw her death in his eyes. He was going to throw it. He was going to crack her skull open right here in the street, and no one would stop him. He drew back his arm. Enough. The single word cut through the chaos like a thunderclap. The voice was deep, resonant, and carried absolute authority. The rock-throwing stopped. The chanting died. Even Luke froze with his arm still cocked back. A man walked down the center of the street, and the crowd parted before him like water before the prow of a ship. Clara, still curled on the ground, looked up through blood and tears and saw him clearly. Jedediah Stone, everyone called him Jed, was a legend in the territory. He stood well over 6 feet tall, with shoulders so broad he had to turn sideways to fit through most doors. His arms, visible below the rolled sleeves of his work shirt, were corded with muscle that looked like it had been carved from oak. His chest strained against the fabric, and when he moved, Clara could see the definition of his stomach muscles, the famous six-pack that made visiting women whisper and giggle. But it was his face that held her attention, weathered and hard, with a close-cropped beard, a strong jaw, and eyes the color of winter ice that missed absolutely nothing. Jed walked straight to Luke, who still held the rock. For a moment, neither man moved. Then Jed's hand shot out, faster than Clara would have thought possible for someone his size, and seized Luke by the throat. He lifted the younger man off his feet as easily as someone might lift a sack of flour. "Drop the rock," Jed said quietly. The rock fell from Luke's nerveless fingers and thudded into the dust. Jed held him there, suspended, Luke's feet kicking uselessly 6 inches above the ground. "You're a coward," Jed said, his voice still quiet, but somehow more terrifying than any shout. "You and your friends, throwing rocks at a girl who never did you any harm. What kind of man does that, Luke? What kind of man?" Luke made choking sounds, his face turning red. Jed lowered him slightly so his toes touched ground, loosening his grip just enough for Luke to breathe. "I asked you a question. I was just, you were only proving you're the worst kind of vermin, the kind that hurts people weaker than themselves because it makes them feel strong." Jed's ice-blue eyes swept over Luke's companions, who were backing away slowly. "Any of you other brave men want to explain yourselves?" They scattered like quail, running in 3 different directions. Pete tripped over his own feet in his haste to escape. Within seconds, only Luke remained, still held by Jed's iron grip. "You're going to apologize," Jed said. It wasn't a question. "Sorry," Luke stammered. "Not to me." Jed turned Luke toward Clara, who was struggling to sit up. To her, "On your knees." For a moment, it looked like Luke might refuse. Then Jed's hand tightened slightly on his throat, and Luke's knees buckled. Jed released him and Luke dropped to the ground, gasping. "I'm waiting," Jed said. Luke looked at Clara with hatred burning in his eyes, but fear won out. "I'm sorry," he forced out. "I'm sorry for what I did." "For throwing rocks at someone who never hurt you," Jed prompted. "For destroying her food, for calling her names. Say it properly." Luke's jaw worked, and Clara could see the humiliation eating him alive. "Good," she thought with sudden viciousness. "Let him feel what I feel every day. I'm sorry for throwing rocks at you and destroying your food and calling you names," Luke recited mechanically. "Now get out of my sight," Jed said. "And if I ever see you bothering Miss Evans again, if I even hear a rumor that you've looked at her wrong, I will finish what we started here. Do you understand?" Luke nodded frantically, scrambled to his feet, and ran. The few remaining spectators quickly found reasons to be elsewhere. Within 30 seconds, the street was empty except for Clara and Jed. Jed turned to her, and his expression softened from fury to something almost gentle. "Can you stand?" Clara tried, but her legs wouldn't cooperate. Her whole body was shaking, and the cut above her eye was bleeding freely, making everything blurry and red. "All right," Jed said quietly. "I'm going to help you up. That okay with you?" Clara nodded, not trusting her voice. Jed bent down and lifted her as easily as he had lifted Luke, but with infinite care, one arm behind her back and one under her knees. Clara felt her face burn with shame at her weight, but if Jed noticed or cared, he gave no sign. He carried her as if she were made of spun glass. "Doc Hemlock's office is 2 streets over," Jed said. "Let's get you looked at." "I can't pay," Clara whispered. "I don't have money for a doctor." "I'll pay. Don't worry about it." Doc Hemlock was a grizzled man in his 60s who had seen everything the frontier could throw at him and remained unshakable. He took one look at Clara's bloody face and Jed's grim expression and simply gestured to the examination table. Jed set Clara down gently and stepped back. "I'll wait outside." "No need," Doc Hemlock said, already examining the cut above Clara's eye. "Nothing here you haven't seen before, I'm sure. This'll need stitches." He looked at Clara. "What's your name, girl?" "Clara Evans." "Well, Miss Evans, this is going to hurt, but I'll be as quick as I can. You comfortable with Mr. Stone staying?" Clara nodded. She didn't want to be alone, and Jed's solid presence was oddly comforting. The doctor worked efficiently, cleaning the wound and stitching it closed with thread and a curved needle. Clara bit her lip to keep from crying out, and she felt Jed's hand settle on her shoulder, steady, warm, anchoring her. "There," Doc Hemlock said finally. "Keep it clean. Come back in a week and I'll remove the stitches. No charge." "Doc," Jed started. "No charge," the doctor repeated firmly. "I watched what happened from my window. Should have gone out and stopped it myself, but I'm an old coward. Least I can do is patch her up for free." He looked at Clara with something like shame. "I'm sorry, Miss Evans. Sorry I didn't help sooner." Clara didn't know what to say to that, so she said nothing. Doc Hemlock turned to Jed. "She's got bruises all over, probably some cracked ribs. She needs rest and decent food." "She'll get it," Jed said. After leaving the doctor's office, Jed walked Clara back toward Widow Gable's boarding house. But halfway there, he stopped and looked down at her. "Where are you staying exactly? What's your situation?" Clara explained her arrangement with Widow Gable, the tiny, unheated room in exchange for endless laundry, the single daily meal of thin soup and stale bread, the constant criticism and occasional cruelty from the widow herself. Jed listened without interrupting, his expression growing darker. When Clara finished, he was quiet for a long moment. "That's not a life," he said finally. "That's slavery dressed up in prettier clothes. It's all I have. It doesn't have to be." Jed looked at her directly. "I have a ranch about 4 hours north up in the mountains. It's good land, well watered, with a solid house and outbuildings. I run cattle and grow enough crops to be self-sufficient. But I'm one man trying to do the work of three. I need help. Someone to cook, clean, tend the garden, manage the household. I'd pay fair wages, provide room and board, and treat you with respect. No one would mock you or hurt you because no one else comes up there except by my invitation." Clara stared at him, trying to understand. "Why would you help me? You don't even know me." "I know enough. I know you've been dealt a bad hand, and you're trying to survive with whatever scraps they throw you. I know you don't deserve to be treated the way this town treats you." His ice-blue eyes were steady. "I also know what it's like to be an outcast. I spent 10 years as a scout in Apache country, saw things that changed me. When I came back to civilization, people looked at me different, afraid, suspicious, like I was something dangerous they couldn't trust. So I built my ranch in the mountains, where I didn't have to see their faces or hear their whispers. I understand what it means to want somewhere safe." Clara felt tears threatening again, but these were different than the ones she'd shed in the street. "What if I'm not good at the work? What if I fail?" "Then you try again until you get it right. I'm not looking for perfection, Clara. I'm looking for someone willing to work hard and learn. Are you?" "Yes." "Then we have a deal." Jed extended his hand, and Clara shook it. His grip was firm but careful, and Clara felt something shift in her chest. A weight she'd been carrying since her parents died suddenly lifting. "When do we leave?" she asked. "First thing tomorrow morning. That gives you time to collect your things and say your goodbyes. Meet me at the livery at dawn. I'll have a wagon ready." Clara went back to Widow Gables and told her she was leaving. The widow's face went through several emotions: surprise, annoyance, then cold indifference. "Fine. Go work for that mountain savage. You'll be back within a week, mark my words. He'll work you to death or worse." But Clara didn't believe that. For the first time in 2 years, she had hope. Real, tangible hope. She packed her few belongings into a canvas bag and lay down on the narrow cot that had been her bed. Through the thin walls, she could hear the widow muttering about ingratitude and stupidity. Clara didn't care. Tomorrow she would leave Dustwater Gulch and its cruelty behind. Tomorrow she would start a new life with a man who had seen her at her lowest moment and offered her dignity instead of mockery. As she drifted off to sleep, Clara touched the stitches above her eye, a reminder of what she was leaving behind and a badge of survival. The behemoth, they'd called her, the monster. But Jed Stone had looked at her and seen a person worthy of rescue. That alone made her believe that maybe, just maybe, her luck was finally changing. Dawn broke cold and clear over the mountains. Clara stood at the livery with her canvas bag, watching Jed load supplies into a sturdy wagon hitched to 2 powerful horses. He worked with efficient grace, his movements economical despite his size. When everything was secured, he turned to Clara and nodded. "Ready?" "Ready." He helped her onto the wagon seat, then climbed up beside her and took the reins. As they rolled out of Dustwater Gulch, Clara looked back once at the town that had been her prison. Then she turned forward, toward the mountains and whatever lay ahead. Jed drove in comfortable silence for the first hour. The trail wound upward through pine forests and past rushing streams, the air growing cooler and sweeter with altitude. Clara watched the landscape change from harsh desert to green valleys, and something inside her began to unclench. Finally, Jed spoke. "I should tell you about the ranch. It's remote. Nearest neighbor is 10 miles away. The work is hard, especially in winter. You'll be alone with me most of the time, which might make you uncomfortable." "Will you hurt me?" Clara asked directly. No. The answer was immediate and certain. "Then I'm not uncomfortable." Jed glanced at her, something like approval in his eyes. "Good, because I need someone I can trust, Clara, someone who won't gossip about my business or steal from me or make my life more complicated. Can you be that person?" Yes. They talked as they traveled, and Clara learned more about Jed. He was 32, had no wife or children, and had built his ranch from nothing over the course of 8 years. He was fair, he said, but expected hard work in return. He didn't tolerate laziness or dishonesty, but he didn't tolerate cruelty either. "You'll have your own room," he said, "with a lock on the door. You use it if you want. I won't take offense. Your safety and comfort are important to me." As the sun climbed toward noon, the ranch came into view. It sat in a natural bowl surrounded by pine-covered slopes with a clear stream running through the property. The main house was built from logs and stone, solid and well-maintained. Behind it stood a barn, a chicken coop, and several other outbuildings. Everything spoke of care and attention to detail. Jed pulled the wagon up to the house and jumped down. He came around to help Clara, and she noticed he didn't grunt or strain despite her weight. He was genuinely that strong. "Welcome home," he said simply. Clara looked at the house, at the mountains rising around them, at the clean air and open space. Tears pricked her eyes, but for once they were happy tears. "Thank you," she whispered. "Thank you for giving me a chance." Jed's expression softened. "Everyone deserves a chance, Clara, and I have a feeling you're going to prove you deserve a whole lot more than that." He was right. Over the weeks and months that followed, Clara threw herself into the work with determination that surprised even her. She learned to cook over a wood stove, to tend chickens and milk cows, to preserve food for winter and manage a household. Jed was a patient teacher, never mocking her mistakes, always showing her a better way when she struggled. And slowly, day by day, Clara began to heal. The constant fear that had lived in her chest since her parents died began to fade. The shame about her body, while not disappearing entirely, became less overwhelming. She was useful here, valued, respected. One evening, 6 months after she'd arrived, Jed came in from working the cattle to find Clara humming as she prepared dinner. He stopped in the doorway and watched her for a moment, a smile touching his normally stern features. "You're happy," he observed. Clara turned, surprised. "I am. Is that all right?" "More than all right." Jed hung up his hat. "This house needed joy in it. You brought that." And Clara realized it was true. She had brought something to this place, just as it had given something to her. She had found not just safety and work, but a home, a real home, with someone who saw her as a person rather than a problem. The mountain man and the girl they'd called a monster. Together, they had built something neither could have created alone. And as winter snows began to fall on the high peaks, wrapping the ranch in white silence, Clara felt a peace she had never known. She was no longer the behemoth. She was no longer the monster. She was simply Clara, and that was enough.